Could there be more to this life we call mine than a journey through space?
There's many things that we could talk about. So, can you hear? Sound is good? Yeah, okay.
Perfect.
So I wanted to speak a little bit about and hear what you girls have to say, you ladies, about you know, how it is for you when things kind of get a little bit challenging. You know what? Say maybe some shadow material presents itself, or you're delivered some kind of a heavy blow, so to speak, some unexpected news. I mean, that's really, we have two certainties in life, right? Is that things are going to shift suddenly and unexpectedly, and that eventually we're all going to die, right? So we can be certain of those two things. And I just had a very sudden kind of a change come up. And I just wondered, how was it for you when things change suddenly? How do you be with that?
For the embodiment and the continued process of refinement, of really committing to what has been recognized, and just meeting all those aspects of the shadow self from the clarity, the openness that's always available. And the way I like to look at this is just that it's like a prod from the divine. It's like a signal or an indicator that there's some aspect of my identified self, my false self, that is really wanting to be fully awake and met. And how that's met is really key, really important, to be able to be present with that and give that space and not have any conditions placed on whatever's coming up. So to give it the full freedom of expression, to explore it, to know it as if you've never experienced it before. And that can be very challenging. You know, it seems as if there's this polarity that can play out. So it's the meeting of those polarities without getting pulled in one direction or the other, just to be able to be there with whatever's arising, because we have no control over it. So it's really about not being controlled by it, as I see it, and having the clarity to respond, not react to whatever's coming up. So, and that can be extremely challenging. You know, it's been extremely challenging for me this week, actually. There's certain aspects of life, particularly in the early experiences, that have been reactivated this week. And it's been, again, another reminder to just practice what I talk about. And be a living example of what I talk about, and to test really where my commitment is. Is my commitment to drama and issues, or is my commitment presence and transmuting or allowing, in a way, because there's no agenda here, it can do what it likes, to see what arises and be curious about it. Be open to exploring it without judging it.
Yeah, I love that curiosity part, because, you know, when you can really let something just be as it is, it gives so much space. It's as if, you know, this space opens and the unexpected, I mean, you know, you kind of get to experience life in a way that you never have before. At least that's my experience, because I mentioned that because I too just had some challenging news. And initially there's just a little bit of a moment of that old kind of behavior wanting to present itself, that wants to get into a little bit of an argument with it, you know? It's like, and it, you know, rises up and wants to be really tough and strong. But it was interesting to notice that the more and more that just staying with this is that there's a softening that happens, and kind of naturally, and it just gives space for a different response.
Yeah.
And it seems like somewhere along the line, I made a decision somewhere that I'm more interested in having a different response, seeing like what response can come that I don't know about yet.
Yeah.
You know, that I haven't seen. And that keeps life really interesting. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to speak up a little bit about this as well, because it's been quite an extensive exploration for me. I can remember in the early days when all of this darkness seemed to be coming up. There was a period of time following the initial awakening, just darkness, just morbid dreams, and even in the waking state, just ungodly images. And it was, I felt bombarded that this was so heavy in consciousness. And because this was all fresh and new to me, I was still taking it deeply personal and thought that I was supposed to clean it up and improve it, you know, and purify it and do all of these things. And so that was the avenue. But, you know, and then I learned spiritual language, like, you know, be with what is. I wasn't spiritual when I woke, trust me, at all. But, you know, so I was learning this lingo, and I was trying to put into practice all of these things. But what I discovered was that I was still doing it from a place of superiority, that was still seeing it as something that had to go. And about 4 years into this, one day I was just exhausted. It just seemed like no matter what I worked on, there was more, and more, and it was amplified in my reality. And I felt like life really surrendered me, because I was so exhausted. I just gave up. There was nothing else I could do. And with that, just the biggest laugh, the biggest relief, that I didn't have to try to be any other way than I am. I wasn't a particular way when awakening initially broke through, when consciousness broke through to itself. You know, I owned a blues biker bar. I was doing a lot of heavy drugs. I drank heavily. I didn't have anything in the right place for anything to happen. I didn't do anything to make that happen. And here I was thinking that I had to do something now that this had already happened, that I had to clean up after it. So, you know, and then there was another long period, 4 or 5 years, of not judging the reactions, not judging any position the conditioning took. For me, it was a true embrace that came through that exhaustion, that surrender that life gave me. And I began to notice, not right away, but eventually, it was as if I was the welcoming space and the reactive personality at once. And what began to happen in that dance of the two, simultaneously there present, was that the sting of the judgment, the heat of reactions began to just lose their power. And then it seemed like I just became more skillful naturally, because there was no resistance in that dance. And of course that continues to this day. And so if reaction comes, sometimes it feels like it's appropriate, you know, and if it feels appropriate, there's no need to think that it has to be any other way. And then there are times when I can feel that it doesn't feel harmonious to myself. And then I'm just grateful. I find myself being grateful for that awareness. And how could I know otherwise? You know. So I think every moment. It's hard to say how we would ever be in a moment, but it just seems to be a natural consequence of the wakefulness and the personality, in that it's constantly becoming one, always becoming one, every moment. So that's my experience with it.
I'm interested to speak a little bit, you know, to sort of move on from that a little bit and perhaps open up a little bit of a discussion about how we meet other people's unconsciousness in our everyday life, because this is something that's come up for me this week. And it's particularly challenging when people really close to us are living from fear, and that there's certain things that are necessary that fear appears to be blocking. And what I've noticed is it really doesn't seem to make any difference how, you know, not that there's an agenda here, but how loving and open and accepting you are. Sometimes that acceptance needs to kick some butt in order to break through certain patterns that are causing suffering for the people in the experience. And it seems that there's an intelligence at play here that doesn't just sort of sit and allow that to happen, that there is action that's motivated by love to give things a little bit of a shake-up. And, you know, this can be one of the most challenging aspects of our human experience that, you know, I found through illness to be largely isolated from a lot of people. And now that's changing drastically. And, you know, I'm very passionate about being a living example within the community. It's not about separating yourself or moving away from that. But it can be extremely challenging when there's a closing down and a running away and avoidance, which is what people tend to operate from a lot of the time. They're scared to be their authentic self because they're scared about what other people may say or do, or, you know, there's all sorts of fears operating. So it's, you know, I'm interested to know how your experience of meeting those kind of things has been. You know, I'm open to hearing from everyone about this because it seems to be something that's really relevant for me right now. So I'm, you know, open to hearing whatever anyone has to say on this topic. If it's inspiring. Maybe it's not that inspiring.
You know, can you hear me?
Yes.
So when we were preparing to come together for this sharing, I was looking this week like what would I like to look at? The only thing that came was the subject or the topic of triggers, like when we are triggered, right, by so-called other.
Yeah.
When we are triggered, does it always mean that it's showing us something we need to look at in ourselves, or are there times when it's like a reaction to the lie, like the rage inside towards the lie everywhere, the lie of separation, the lie, right?
Interesting question.
Yeah.
So relevant to what I've been talking about.
So I was looking at this question, and what the answer that started to come back to me were like just in the same as the last sharing that was coming through Prajna and Gloriji. and you, this polarity of, you know, on the one hand, there's all this that we can be clearly seeing, being triggered by, like, the lie we're seeing, yeah. And on the one hand, there's a reaction going off inside us that belongs to the old way of behaving, while at the same time, behind it, there is a true trigger to get more true. Yeah. So the polarity is there at the same time.
Yeah, interesting.
So when we're able to, like, distinguish between where we're going off in the old way to react to it and the opportunity to, okay, step into a new way to react to it with new eyes in a way that I've never stepped before. So I don't actually know how that looks like until I step. But that brings about, like, you know, the old way that seems to match what we're seeing, which is all belonging to the old version of humanity. And then this new way that hasn't yet quite found its way in this particular walking to be born. And for that, we have to get out of the way and really open to a new way to show itself. It's like a constant surrendering to, okay, what's the new way I can step into this? Which is a dying and being born.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at these last couple of days.
Fascinating.
Because the triggers never end. They never will end, right? And so we're constantly being invited to step into new and updated version of, and at the same time the polarity of the dying, and that's always updating. It's not like the idea of, okay, if we are now awakened beings, we will now act like this. You know, that's the new way. Because soon that new way becomes the old way, very soon. Because, you know, just like the old iPhones, how long do they last before the next one comes out? And we have to learn how to work the whole thing all over again. And it's just like, you know.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
There may have been an assumption in me. I'm just looking at this now as you're talking, that triggers are, it depends whether there's an emotional disturbance or not to what's arising. And I'm not even clear as I'm talking about this now. It's really interesting to look at that. It was like, what I noticed in my own process was that there were certain things that didn't get triggered anymore, but that could be seen from a different vantage point. And as I'm looking at what you're saying now, it's interesting because there is a trigger in me that is reacting to the lie. And there's a frustration that's been arising with it. Of course, it's all true, ultimately. But there does appear to be this sea of ignorance that we're interacting with all the time. And it's almost like a toxicity that arises within my system in response to that. And a trusting in the truth that even though there may be reactivity here, that reactivity is necessary in order to shake up what's hidden and what doesn't appear to know itself.
The question I would have in that is that reaction matching what's coming, or is that reaction free, like coming
I know what you mean.
Newly made. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. Is it playing into the drama, or is it unlocking the drama?
The level of what's coming to you, does it match that level? Does it come from the lie also? Does it come from the old, the
Right.
stale,
Right.
the getting moldy?
Right.
Or is it organic and fresh? You know,
Right.
and I think there's always going to be a mix of it. Anyway, in my experience, there's always a mix where I see like what's ready to die, and it's on the table. It's like it's what's ready to die next, because it's endless dying and then it's being born. Yeah.
I like this. Yeah, I want to add in. I like this expression because I don't think I've heard it before. The shake up. You know, that there's a little shake up, which to me that in you can clarify, Karen, if I'm wrong, but I think this idea of shaking up kind of to me feels like a standing up in a sense, like a taking responsibility, like it has an energy of courage to it.
Yeah.
You know, like there's a courageous kind of alignment, you know, like there's something inside of us that is aligning with truth, that's already in alignment with it.
Yeah.
So then when something is off, it's kind of like a spark
Yeah.
of an energy. And I think that with that, like part of, for me, what has come in over the years, because I grew up in a very, what you could call a patriarchal masculine kind of more of approach to life, that now what is coupled with that, which feels like it's a sister, is softness or kindness. You know, that there's an element that allows something to be met differently in the sense that it doesn't fight, flight, freeze. Like talk about that, something in myself that might be triggered, or even if I'm trying to meet something unconscious in another,
Yeah.
I can turn that whole thing around and say, well, how would I meet this in myself?
Oh,
You know, how do I let this come close here if it were me, because it is me.
yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, and then that informs the movement, the behavior. You know, like how I like the language that Ananta is using, the dying, you know, and something else hasn't quite revealed itself, and to trust how that's going to show itself, that we can pick up the new phone and figure out its operating system.
Yeah.
That's a really good analogy, by the way, about the phone,
really.
because it's true. It's like as soon as you think you have some ground, then that ground again can get a little bit shaky. And that's another piece of it too, is that ability to constantly ground yourself, you know, to keep grounding. Like today I needed to ground a lot. Like I was, just before we met, I was saying, you know, I just feel like so much is going on. I don't know if I really want to have a meeting. But then I did the grounding. You know, I just grounded and sat, and it was like, oh, it's like it never happened. You know, so this whole way of being kind with ourselves, where we can stop and we can just let everything down and, you know, see what comes. You don't have to figure it out.
Could there be more to this life we call mine than a journey through space, or a storyline? More to life than the body can sense.